This episode is brought to you by Our Daily Bread Ministries, a global media organization that makes the life-changing wisdom of the Bible understandable and accessible to all. Visit whereyou'refrom.org for more information. That's whereyafrom.org.
Welcome to the Grace Enough podcast. I am your host, Amber Cullum. This week, I sit down with Vivian Mabuni to discuss investing your lives in others so that they may know and walk with Jesus. We discuss our heart posture toward discipleship, inquiring of the Lord, and some practical ways to begin discipling others. Listen to what Vivian shares about our heart posture.
The posture of our heart is so important because we can be willful, which I was just describing, where it's like we're just trying to do it in our own effort and we're trying to muster it up, but it's unsustainable. And it really does lead to burnout. And that's a willful heart. Or we can swing to the other extreme where we have a will-less heart, where we just kind of think, it doesn't matter. I'm just. And so what God, I believe, asks of us is that we would have a willing heart. And a willing heart and hands that are open means that we are surrendered to what God would have, what he would place in our lives and what he would even take out of our lives. That place of surrender is when we actually experience freedom.
Today's conversation is like sitting down with a dear friend who you always look forward to meeting with because she both challenges and encourages you. But before we begin, I would like to introduce you to one of this week's sponsors. Do you want to memorize scripture? Me too, but I struggled with daily practice until I discovered Dwell Differently. Dwell helps you memorize one verse each month by taking the first letter of every word in a verse, stringing them together in a cool design, and providing the design as a temporary tattoo, on a key tag, and a 4x5 card. How awesome is that? Everywhere you go, you're reminded of the verse you're memorizing. Each month, you get a kit in the mail. Members also get a digital kit with screensavers and downloadable coloring sheets. The best part is that people are always asking you what your tattoo means. It's an easy way to share your faith. And the verses can be memorized alone, with friends, and with family of all ages. That's what I love, memorizing the monthly verse with my children. Find them at dwelldifferently.com, at dwelldifferently on Instagram and Facebook, or take a listen to their podcast by searching for Dwell Differently on your favorite podcast player. Good afternoon to you, Vivian, and welcome to the Grace Enough podcast.
Oh, Amber, we're finally talking. I'm so excited.
I know, right? What the listeners don't know is we've been trying to do this for, goodness, several months, and pandemic hits and all kinds of interesting things. So I'm very excited to be here today. Go ahead and just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your family, and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So I am recording from Southern California. We live here in Mission Viejo, which is halfway between LA and San Diego. My husband and I have been married. It'll be 30 years in July.
Woo!
And we have 3 young adult kids now. So there is a day when parents, your kids will know how to put their own shoes on and get into the car by themselves, and they will actually drive away one day. It does happen. It does happen. The days are long and the years are short. It
so true.
Truly is true, right? So anyway, my husband and I have been on staff with Cru, formerly Campus Crusade, for 32 years now.
So awesome.
And 28 of those years, we were working with college students with the campus ministry.
Yeah.
And in the last several years, I've transitioned over to speaking and writing as my primary job, which has been really kind of a bringing together of life experience and passions. And I've just been having a wonderful time doing that. And also one of my passion projects that I've been working on is Some Days Here, which is a podcast for Asian American Pacific Islander women. And just this new collective of AAPI Christian women leaders. And that's been something that I've wanted for myself all my life. And now I'm in a place to kind of try
Do that.
God to do that. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing from kind of a day-to-day
And
life.
it's such an awesome time to be stepping into that. And I know that it affects you personally. I just, every time I see something that you post or a testimonial from someone, it's such a gift, right? To see, that representation really does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you. And thank you for just the awareness that you bring to
Mm.
people like me
Mm-hmm.
who otherwise does not understand. So thank you.
Sure. Well, that's very motivating for me to hear, obviously in your own life, Amber, but also I do spend quite a lot of time in predominantly white spaces.
Yes.
But a lot of my motivation is for that very reason, that as I'm there and whether I'm teaching the Bible or sharing some of my story, it serves to help raise awareness.
Yeah.
And then there's a connection point because now there's a person and a face that kind of connects to what's going on, even not nationwide. So in the same way for me, I grew up in Colorado and I didn't have a lot of Black friends. But in my adult life, I have now become very dear friends with a whole number of African-American women who are so amazing and brilliant and wonderful, but now their pain is my pain.
Yeah.
And
So
as
true.
they walk through the different challenges, I am experiencing it very differently because of proximity.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a lot of the reason why I remain very committed to being in spaces where there's more opportunity to educate and to build awareness and invite people to come and taste what life is like for me as an Asian American.
Yeah. And while we're going to talk mostly about discipleship today, I do want to make one more comment towards that, which is every time I engage with someone who just really disagrees with how I view things, when it comes to, race, ethnicity, whatever, my question is always, have you ever just sat down and talked to someone who is
Mm,
not like you? And I'm not talking about that person that you say is your friend. I'm saying, have you ever actually asked some of the hard questions of those people that are your friend? Meaning, have you opened yourself up to be empathetic towards someone else's experience? And
mhm.
honestly, most of the time I don't receive a comment back. And so I will continue to do that and stand with you and other people because that's what makes a difference.
That really encourages me because I do think that there are things that you can say as a white woman to other white women that it would be inappropriate for me to say. So
Yeah.
so I appreciate that because there are so many weird stereotypes that
Oh,
people just buy into because of media portrayal or whatever without actual relationship and lived experience. And
it's so
so
true.
that is really one of the places of healing takes place on a personal level. And then there's just awareness with what is going on systemically and otherwise. So just and a more comprehensive understanding of history
Yep.
and American history, all of that. It's just, we live in a great time where there are
Right.
a lot of resources where we can fill in the blanks a little bit more because the world has kind of grown smaller. And
That's
there are
right.
opportunities to learn from one another via podcast, via, just sharing our stories and our lives.
That's
So
so true. Well, I love when I get started to talking to someone for them to just briefly share, how did you first come to know Jesus and begin walking with him?
I love that question because it's so good to be reminded. I think as believers, it is just, I think that's why God kept the Israelites in a place where they needed to continue to remember, like, remember
Yes.
God did this. And they had the memorials set up so that they could remember. So I love the story because it reminds me again of God's faithfulness. So I did not grow up in a Christian home. I grew up culturally Buddhist, which pretty much meant that we had certain holidays that we do certain celebrations, kind of like Mulan or Coco, something,
Yes. Yeah.
that trying to help your listeners to kind of make a
That's right. We're
connection
all
there. But
familiar with
yeah,
those two
those
movies,
two,
right?
right? So there were, incense and, inviting the dead spirits of, ancestors to come, that kind of idea. But it didn't influence my life in any way from day to day. So that's what I mean by culturally Buddhist. I've come to find there are a lot of cultural Christians as well, that kind of just go through the motions, but it doesn't really impact their day-to-day life, their relationship with Jesus. So I was fortunate in high school so I grew up in Boulder, which is totally granola and very new age and lots of cults.
It's so funny, to think that it was granola then, because if it was granola then, and I know what it's like now. It's like, woo, next level.
Yes. So of course I grew up and I feel very comfortable in all the weird cities like Portland and Berkeley and Austin, Madison, like just pick all the really weird ones and I feel right at home. So
that's awesome.
I grew up in that environment. So I always was spiritually minded, and I wrote papers in high school about UFOs and Ouija boards and tarot cards and whatever, because I knew that there was more to life than what I could see.
Yeah.
And so I knew there was a spiritual realm somehow. And then I was just fortunate that in my math class in high school, I sat next to a friend and I watched her transform sitting next to me day after day in math class. And I was like, what happened to you? Did you become a vegetarian? You're glowing. And she's like, what? And she goes, no, I have a personal relationship with God. I'm like, well, what do you mean? You go to church now? She goes, no, I have a personal relationship with Jesus.
Wow.
And so she shared that with me. And I'll have to be honest with you, Amber, I heard that and I was disappointed because I was like, you're so smart and you're so funny. How could you be duped into believing all this mythology? That was really my perspective. And she just shared her life and her love for God. And God was so intimately involved in her life in such a way that it was just undeniable. And she just had this glow about her that it was just so evident that there was something very authentic going on that was notably different. So that sent me on a spiritual journey. And I ended up putting my trust in Christ between my sophomore and junior year of high school through a different friend, different set of circumstances, and then went and tried to live the Christian life in my own effort. So I knew that Christians went to church. So the mornings that I woke up, I would drive myself to church. I'd cry through all the worship songs and I'd drive home and there was still no life change. And then I went to the mall and bought a Bible and I opened it up and started reading it. And it was so boring and dry. And I couldn't understand the measurements of this temple and all the names of all these kings. And there was no connecting, so I was actually more frustrated having become a Christian because now my eyes were open to right and wrong, but I could not live consistently right. So I really was ready to toss it. I tossed my whole relationship with God, just like another phase. And then my dad went through midlife crisis and he moves our family right before my senior year of high school.
Oh,
not
goodness.
Across town, not to another state, but he moves our entire family from 17 years in Boulder, Colorado to Hong Kong.
Oh my goodness.
I know. So this is where the remembering part is so important to me because what I thought was the end of everything at the time as a 17-year-old, I was mad at God. Every security was taken away. I grew up speaking Mandarin Chinese, but the dialect in Hong Kong is Cantonese and the two pronunciations are completely different. So it might as well have been Portuguese. You know what I mean? So there was just every security was taken away, no relationships, nothing. And so I was mad at God. And I had one of those ultimatum prayers in Hong Kong where I said, I am so mad, but I really do sincerely want to know you. And I need a church, a youth group, Christian friends. And if you do that, I'll give you my whole life. Hold nothing back from you. Otherwise, I'm going to go out and get drunk and do something I'll probably regret, but I'm never talking to you again.
I mean, it's in like true teenager fashion right there, right?
Yes,
like
where the brain has not fused yet, but
from green to red in a half a second.
In a hot second. So, but isn't God just so good? Because now I look back and I remember, and he came through in Hong Kong of all the places. And I learned about discipleship. I learned how to share my faith. I was discipled myself. I started seeing friends come to Christ because I followed through on my part. Whereas God provided the very things I had prayed for, I followed through and I gave him my whole life. I just said, I am all in. And that to me is the secret sauce of the Christian life. That has set apart. Every believer I've ever met that has that same glow that my friend had has a point in time when they said, yes, I'm all in.
Mm.
And that all in is something that I believe we as believers come to crossroads over and over in our lives as life gets more complicated and complex. I'm still brought to places as, circumstances happen. So that's a little bit of my story.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have to ask though, because then you did go on and get involved in crew. So I'm assuming, did you come back to the States for college?
I did. I applied to one school because I grew up in Boulder, so I knew the University of Colorado. So that I didn't have a guidance counselor. Like I only applied to the University of Colorado to the business school because my parents said that might be practical. So but I remember asking my youth pastor, like, I don't want this love for Jesus to be just a phase I'm going through
Mm,
here. How do I keep walking with God? And he said, you need to find a group of other college students who are going to help encourage you in your walk with him. So look
absolutely.
up InterVarsity or Navigators or Campus Crusade, find a vibrant fellowship and plug right in. So I took those words to heart and I
Mm,
went on a quest. I arrived to college ready and looking, and I ended up making some of the best friends of my life and in an incredible environment that really helped me to solidify um, the root
yes.
system, the foundations of my faith, which has then, kept me walking with him the rest of these years.
Right. I mean, college ministry changed my life. It was the tool God used to really change my life. I'm always encouraging young people, gosh, don't miss out on it. You are not missing out on anything in college by not doing all those other things, but you will never regret meeting your lifelong friends in college
Hmm.
ministry.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And
so
I love
true.
it because for those who've been raised in a Christian home, even it's that first time away from home where
That's right.
you really start to own your own faith.
That's
Like
right.
you really have to make those decisions like who who do I believe God is? Will I continue to invest into my relationship with him if I don't have the external pressures of my family? And
Yeah.
I think that's the magic of doing campus ministry and college ministry. I will always have a very huge part of my heart that just will always love college students for that reason.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you have poured your life into hundreds of women through college ministry, discipling them. And so tell us a little bit about that period. I mean, I want to say that period, but it's not like it's over. You've just transitioned because your husband's still, I mean, you're both still on staff with crew, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so just tell us a little bit about that journey and, how you've poured into women, young women, particularly when it comes to discipleship.
Well, I am convinced that as believers, we're called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, to love our neighbors ourselves. And then there's two specific things that Jesus said in the Great Commission to go out and make disciples.
Mhm.
That is a command that he gave to all believers. And he
Yeah.
just said, just invest your life into others. And then Paul gives us the illustration in 2 Timothy 2:2, where, the things that we've heard in the presence of many witnesses, these entrust to faithful people who will be able to do that to others. So there's just this sense of our lives multiplying. So rather than you and I trying to talk with one person and then go to the next person and through addition try to reach the world, that multiplication and exponential growth takes place as we invest into the lives of faithful people who then turn around, and it's very possible. So that's what Jesus did, that he had his 12 and especially the three, but I mean, here we are today because of discipleship. So I'm absolutely convinced, like from the scriptures, that this is what we're called to do as believers. But I just think about what really matters in life and the kind of relationships that we can have investing into the lives of others, and especially those who are still in a season where they're just a few seasons behind us.
Mhm.
It's just helpful. So even when I was a young mom, to be able to be with a mom who was in a different life stage, it was just so helpful. Like, how do I walk
Yes,
with Jesus? I can't even go to the
absolutely.
bathroom by myself. I just, so whether it's like through MOPS and the mentor moms or whatever, there's, places where we can encourage the ones coming after us.
Yeah.
And that's what I love. I'm so passionate about that. So we can't do everything, but I think that all believers can be in places where we are being mentored and discipled, that we can seek to build into the next generation as well. And it doesn't have to be rigid. I
Right.
think that there's like seasons, and there are relationships that come and go that are based on where we live or our life stage, or, certain connections at church or, outside of church. So there's just some really beautiful places. But I just think, I hope to my dying day with my last breath, that this is still going to be a part woven into my life, that I would weave into others that would continue to do the same.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, discipleship can be such this big churchy word. Um, and I think sometimes people are like, oh, I want to disciple someone, or I want to be discipled. And we have to be so, I think about one of my closest friends, Allison, who is about 7 years ahead of me. And, she was like, I don't even really know how to do that. And I'm like, but you're really doing it for me already. Like, you don't even
Mhm.
realize what you're doing. The fact that you're even honest with me about the struggles you have with your middle school boys when I had newborns,
Yeah.
and then you're trying as hard as you can to address that from a biblical way, or a way of
Mhm.
Jesus. Like, that was discipling me because she
Yeah.
was my good friend, and it was very
Mhm.
intentional. And so when you think about that, like, what are some practical ways that you would say this is discipling someone?
Well, I would say for those that are seeking to be discipled, or even to being available to disciple, I would say for sure, without it being kind of a formality that we start a meeting and end a meeting with prayer, but genuinely
Yeah.
seeking the Lord, inquiring of Him. Um, I think it can be pretty organic,
Mhm.
in the sense that there's just a click, like if I'm listening to the Lord and other people are asking the Lord, He is so faithful to bring our paths to cross. And so I would say that there are a few things that would be important for those seeking to disciple, is that to really pray through, like Jesus spent all night in prayer before He selected the 12. So it's not like you just kind of, oh, let's just do coffee. Like, there is a very He was
Mm.
intentional. And I think we need to be intentional and invest in people who are going to take it seriously and not flake, people who are teachable and want to learn.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's significant that when someone is genuinely seeking someone to disciple them or to mentor them, that they have been proactive in that,
Yeah.
and
I
they have,
totally agree.
and they come with questions, even like, hey, I have this situation, I'd love your input. What do you think about this? Or, there's a trust that's built. And for me now, as I've grown over decades of discipling, I think before I used to feel very responsible for, and I'm also a
Mhm.
codependent too. So that's, that is
That's a
part of my
side
issues.
note.
Just, so it's kind of interesting that there are a lot of codependents who are nurses and missionaries, there's just a consistency there. So I am a codependent, recovering codependent. So, but in my early years, especially, I felt so responsible for
Mm.
all of the outcomes and the decisions, and just really wanting to make sure that they would make wise decisions, and if I could in any way help them to do just that. And as I've gotten older, I feel less of that pressure, that I don't have to have the answers, and I don't
Mhm.
have to determine the outcomes. I don't know
Yeah.
the end of the story. I can share from my life experience. I can share what I'm learning in the scriptures. I can continue to point each and every person back to the Lord and His character and who He is, so that they are not dependent upon me, but are ultimately always dependent on the Lord. And it's like that with parenting. Like, our kids are so dependent initially, but our whole point is to have them be able to make decisions, live with the consequences of their choices, and think rightly, and have their own relationship with Jesus, and hear the
Mhm.
shepherd's voice and follow Him. So if we're a part of that journey, that's just an incredible privilege.
It really is.
I think that often, even in our churches, there are a lot of women that are biblically illiterate and really need help to learn foundations. And I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of what discipleship for me is helping a new believer and even someone who's grown up in the church that may not feel very strong in their faith
Yeah.
to get grounded and rooted, and that their foundation would be strong.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. If anybody's listening right now, I've had people ask me before, well, like, how do you get a mentor, disciple? And you said it earlier. I mean, be proactive. I prayed and then, I mean, I just sought people out. Like, I see that this woman, I see these characteristics in her, and I'm going to ask her if she's interested in mentoring me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all they could
Yeah.
do is say no.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so don't be afraid to do that,
Yeah.
you
I think
know?
it's so good. Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be, it can just be an initial connecting over coffee
Yeah,
and then
that's right.
letting it be kind of an organic thing. But I have experienced this over and over, that as I've said yes, I hear later that someone else had been praying, and it's like
Yes.
there was a yes in my heart and there was a yes in that person's heart. So it was a really good match.
Ugh, I love that.
What are dads made for?
I've been asking myself the same question.
Author Amanda Glass, creator of the Made For book series, helps kids and dads answer that question. That's what Dads Are Made For is more than just a fun book with cute pictures. It's one that creates conversations that build meaningful connections. This Father's Day, help your kids connect with Dad as they discover together.
Oh, that's what dads are made for.
For kids 3 and up, just $9.99 when you order now at themadeforbooks.com.
So, in a culture where we seem to go, 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 now we're in a little bit of a different season because we're coming out of a pandemic, but I already see it kind of happening a little bit again. We often feel we aren't living on purpose.
Mm.
And so, in your book, Open Hands, Willing Heart, you encourage your readers to look at the posture of their hearts, which I just love. What does that really mean? And, how did that play into your surrendering to God back when you were a college student?
I love that question. So the title of my book, Open Hands, Willing Heart, really is, to me, the North Star, kind of a guiding checkpoint. Like I can use that in an instant, can really,
Mm,
evaluate and just see where I'm at and readjust as needed.
yeah.
I think the posture of our heart is really important because we can tend to overdo it and then burn out or become cynical and bitter and feel used because we were doing things that we thought we were supposed to be doing, but God never called us to, but we just ran on
So
that
true.
hamster wheel, and the smoke was coming and the wheels are coming off. And that's not what honors the Lord. I think it's a long haul that we are called to walk with Jesus, and it's a marathon. So
Yeah.
being able to discern, and as I'm, in the Old Testament right now in my own Bible reading, I keep seeing how David inquired of the Lord. And when David inquired of the Lord, God answered. And and the kings that spent the time, like, can we just inquire of the Lord? Like, just simple.
Mm,
That is a great starting point. The other thing is that the posture of our heart is so important because we can be willful, which I was just describing, where it's like we're just trying to do it in our own effort and we're trying to muster it up, but it's unsustainable. And it really does lead to
so
burnout,
true.
right?
Yes.
And that's a
yes.
willful heart. Or we can swing to the other extreme where we have a will-less heart, where we just kind of think, it doesn't matter. I'm just. And so what God, I believe, asks of us is that we would have a willing heart.
Yeah.
And a willing heart and hands that are open means that we are surrendered to what God would have, what he would place in our lives and what he would even take out of our lives. That place of surrender is when we actually experience freedom. We also have the benefit of the power of the Holy Spirit to lead and direct us, because it's kind of like the flow can come through this surrender. It's when I'm clutching and my hands and my fists are so tight, it's really hard to listen. And it's, I am just
Yes.
demanding, and I start to pray with a lot of directives. Like, okay, I'm firstborn too, so I'm kind of bossy, but I'm just like, okay, God, this is the problem, and this is how you're supposed to fix it. And you need to do this now in this person's life and that person's life. And, and instead of really coming with open hands and maybe not even any words, but just literally placing that person and lifting that person to the King and saying, here, Lord, I surrender them to you, because your will is perfect and it may not be what I want. And I am sitting right now in this very moment with a dear friend who's just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I cannot make sense of that, Amber. Like,
I
I
know.
cannot make sense of that except for to continue to lift my friend up and ask the Lord. I think it's absolutely fine to ask for healing, but I think, again, that posture of surrender of like, yes, Lord, your will be done. I don't know what that is, but I'm praying that your will would be done and that you would intervene in just the right ways and be glorified in and through the situation that I cannot understand. So that's, to me, what willing looks like, what surrender looks like. I'm a cancer survivor myself, so I've had to walk that path personally with 3 kids that I want to live. I want to be at every milestone, and to need to continually surrender over and over again and trust that he is good. His will and his ways are loving and good and right. And ultimately, he is sovereign and nothing surprises him. And he is worth following. I think that as the longer we go on in life, though, there's probably more questions than answers. And in that way, I think for me, with the hard things in life, I think I have a greater empathy for people who struggle with trusting God. And I can understand that now in a different way, but I still find that my anchor is in the character of God, and he does not change. And we can choose to push him away during the hard times, but I have to say that in leaning toward him and seeking his face, it changed a lot of my experience because I had the benefit of his comfort and his presence with me. I don't think that God is ever offendedness. Like I think he's big enough to handle our honest and raw emotions.
Absolutely.
And so we don't need to fake it with him. I think we need to just come to him. And usually for me, it's like, why did I wait so long? Like, truly, where can we go? You have words of eternal life, just like Peter said, and that really is, it's like that love relationship with Jesus. At the end of the day, that's what it's really, really all about.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and I think about how we're just talking about heart posture and, a heart posture. Yes, it is a heart of worship and, surrender to him. But it is, like you said, it's also an honest posture of, I'm angry right now, Lord, but I know that you can handle that too.
Yes.
I'm confused. So you are not the author of confusion. So clear that up for me. And so that goes into that posture so much too, all the emotion, he can handle that.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's just, it is. I mean, I hadn't really thought about heart posture as much in that way because I've always thought about it as surrender as well. But it is, it's all of it. He is so faithful. And I am so grateful because even if it doesn't happen overnight, that you were talking about it earlier, the Joshua stones, he asks us to really like stack those up. And it's like, it's so you remember.
Yes.
It's so that you can look and say, remember when I told you were going to walk across there and you're going to get in the promised land? Well, here you are.
There you go. Yeah.
We need the remembrance.
We need the remembrance. And it doesn't make the moment, on one hand, it does make it easier when we can look back and see God was faithful, but it's still hard to choose to trust. So the circumstances may be different and we can look back at God's faithfulness, but the actual choosing to surrender and trust is still gut wrenching, wrenchingly.
Try again.
Yes.
That's a hard one. Gut
Wrenchingly, gut wrenchingly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing in this book, you do write about common roadblocks to full surrender. And so, will you share a few of those with us? I know you talk about entitlement, busyness. There's so many,
Hmm.
but will you share a few of those and just kind of how those play out in our lives?
Oh yeah.
Ugh,
Oh, here we
ugh.
go. So I loved, well, I yeah, I did enjoy writing this book because it's so much of my story wrapped into,
Yeah.
all of the things I've been pondering and thinking on all of these years. And I think it's really my lived experience of the places where I have struggled with having open
Mhm.
hands. Those have been the times when I've been bitter, or I've been too busy, or I have felt entitled,
Mm.
or I have just not cared and been apathetic. Like those are all
Yeah.
these roadblocks, right? And I just think, doing it in my own effort and the self-reliance and all that stuff. And then I kind of shift gears, like even when we live with open hands, our lives don't end up looking like how we thought the happily ever after would be. And there's, how do we live in the midst of, appointment, and how do we live
Yeah.
in the midst of really hard circumstances that we don't understand? So there's, serving without seeing. I think that is really a lot of the
Mm.
for the young moms out there, that sometimes we feel so invisible, like, did you leave me on the shelf, Lord? And I'm living surrendered, but I am serving without seeing. We
Mm.
sometimes don't get to see the side of heaven, the difference that we made in someone's life. And I think
So
we will
true.
be so surprised one day when people come up to us and say, hey, it was because what you did at the Starbucks drive-through, or when you encouraged me with those few words in Trader Joe's the other day, that changed the trajectory.
Yeah.
Like, I just think so there's a few stories that, I was privileged to hear about later, of things I had no idea about. And I think that's just this picture that we serve without seeing. And that's part of our journey as well. So there's the faith element, that while we have air in our lungs and a heart that beats, we're on
Mm.
assignment, and it matters. The people
Yeah.
that are in our lives matter. Nothing is haphazard, nothing is wasted. And learning to embrace no from God does not mean, when God says no, it doesn't mean he stopped loving us.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think, as a believer, I think that only yeses to my prayers are indicators
Whew.
that God loves us. But even no's are from a God who loves and is good.
Well, and I think about, you said something there that I'm like, one of my really good college friends, Christy, she is one of the very first people that I met in FCA. And I'll
Mhm.
never forget, I just didn't know much about the Bible. I knew I wanted to know Jesus. I did know him at that point, but my life was still kind of a mess. And I remember sliding, a little piece of paper under my dorm room door that had, Jeremiah 29:11 on it, which most people who've been a believer for a while know. But at that point, I didn't know that.
Mm.
And she, if she listens to this now, probably still has no idea how much that little note impacted me.
Yes.
And yes, we became roommates and we became friends. But in that moment,
Mm.
it mattered a lot. Like,
Yes.
it really changed a lot. It potentially changed the trajectory of my life, in a sense of that's what God decided to use to say, hey,
Mm.
this is the truth about you.
Yeah.
This is the truth about me. So, like,
Mm.
come on, be friends with this girl, be friends with this crowd, like, move on. So
Yes.
it is so true. I mean, you have
Mhm.
no idea what little gestures and all kinds of different things, the impact that it has on people for forever. So I really, really love that. Um, but you encourage us to run the mile we're in. And I speak, to comparison often, and know that's kind of, we can get our eyes on all kinds of different things and people. But how have you really stayed focused? I mean, you have worked for the same organization for, what did you say, 30 years?
32.
I mean, that is incredible. And I know along the way, there's been plenty of people that it would have been real easy. And I'm sure you did it. We all do it. But it's like, coming back to the mile you're running. What are some ways that you encourage people and that you said, this is what God's given me to do, and I'm keeping my eyes focused here?
Wow. I'll probably have to sit on that question for a little bit, but my
That's all
initial
right.
thought, my initial thought is where we fix our eyes is incredibly important. I think about Hebrews 12:1-2, where it says, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So there's a couple things there. One is obviously where we fix our eyes, and that, when we start to do the comparison thing, there's always 10 people taller than us and 10 people shorter than us, and 10 people with more money and 10 people with less, and 10 people who are smarter and 10 people who are not. And it can lead to pride or despair, and both are focused on self. Yep. So one of the ways that I've been able to keep my eyes focused on Jesus has been, and this actually came out of my cancer journey, where because of really being in a place of dependence on others, I started to read the scriptures differently. And that same Hebrews 12:1-2, what stood out to me after cancer was, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes. So the Christian life was never meant to be lived alone. So probably the biggest thing is being with other people who are going to encourage me to run the race that is with me, that I'm called to at this point in time. That probably single-handedly has made the biggest difference, because I do think that we become like the people around us. And when I spend time with women who all they care about is how many carats their diamond is, and and
how many carrots they ate today.
Exactly. Right. All the carrots, right? The orange ones and the diamond ones. But we just can get completely inundated. And that becomes what we think about, what we obsess about, what we put all of our energies toward. And when I'm with friends who really do recognize that Jesus is the King, he is worthy of our everything, that people matter, that all people are made in the image of God, that our lead foot would be love, that we would love well, and we would love God with all of our being. When I'm with those kinds of believers, I leave with my spirit like fired up to run my mile. You know what I mean? And
that's right.
That's, I think, as the longer I go, the more I realize that the community piece is genuinely, I think, how God created us to live out our faith.
I mean, it's like there's so many people too that they're running their mile. And it's so I've gotten to where now I'm like, whoa, if I'm really struggling with that comparison, what is it about that person that I admire? I mean, maybe they have this quality and God's ready to develop that in me. So go to them and ask, hey, I see you doing this well. Is there I don't know, is there any way you can mentor me in that? Or you got any tips for me? And it's like, all of a sudden it's not a threat anymore. It's you're awesome at this and God's gifted me this way. And can we run side by side, whatever it may be? And so, it is amazing. I will say you're right. Like the older we get, age helps a lot, right?
Yes. And I decided older is 15 years past wherever you are. So, we're not quite like old, but
I know. My kids are like, Mom, you were born in the 1900s. And I'm like, Yes, I was.
True story. Oh my goodness. It's just,
right?
It is just too much. But no, I think that you're totally onto something there with, we don't have to live in scarcity. There is enough of everything, and God is a God of abundance. So even our ideas and our skills, I think we can be very open-handed even in that, because God will continue to provide opportunities and ideas. And, if you're an idea person, I think we can trust that if we came up with these ideas, God will continue to give them to us, and that we can continue to be dispensers of blessing to the people around us, and to live with those kind of open hands where it's like, it's all from him anyway, from him, through him, and to him.
And to him. Amen. Well, you're right. Having a willing heart means that we obey without seeing the end of the story, which we've kind of talked about, and trusting our work and our lives to the hands of the one who sees the end from the beginning. To encourage our listeners, will you share a story where you now know the outcome? So you can see now, and I mean, that may be your cancer story, but it's that Joshua stone for you, right? Like you picked it up, you've laid it down, and now you can look back when you're in a place of real struggle and say, okay, God, I know you're faithful.
This is so timely. I think I need to sit and remember. And that is something that we need to keep going back to, being reminded of. I think about what life looks like right now that I had no idea about in the midst of being bald and going through chemo and radiation and surgeries. And I think in those dark days, where I just wasn't sure what was going on. And honestly, there's a part of me that, struggled with the entitlement piece, like, Lord, we gave you our whole lives. We're missionaries. We've been serving you. Like, what does this even mean? And having no idea that it was going to be through cancer that God used cancer to pull the writer out in me. Like, it was just this completely bananas thing. So I started writing during cancer, on a medical blog, on a Caring Bridge blog. And that was kind of the impetus that started the whole writing journey, which led to an author I never met who happened to read the blog, who forwarded it to an editor. And that ended up becoming my first book. And just the doors that the Lord opened as a result. But I do have a fun story to share with you, that during cancer, one of my really good friends is a marathon runner. So she has run I know, that's a special gift that I do not possess. But she was made to run. And so she told me that at the end of the LA marathon, the Los Angeles marathon, there are Japanese taiko drummers that play right at the finish line. And you can hear them playing the drums, and you can hear the sound about a mile out. And it just gets louder and louder as you get closer and closer. So it's just kind of this visual for me. And when I was going through the chemo part, that was probably the hardest stretch of this cancer piece for me. I was just straining to hear those taiko drums in my mind of just the finish line of chemo. And when I had my final chemo, three of my dearest friends and their kids were banging pots and pans, in the kitchen and celebrating that way. So anyway, but during cancer, my girlfriend said, when this whole madness ends, we need to do something really fun, like go to Italy or something to celebrate, and so when I'm bald, I was just like, okay, I'm going to trust you with Italy maybe one day. So then cancer treatment ended. We went on to life, and then, dreams of Italy kind of fell away. And then an opportunity opened up to go to a women's conference in Florida. So there in Florida, we realized, hey, do you know what's in Florida? The Epcot Center. And do you know what's inside the Epcot Center? Is Italy. So we were like, something's better than nothing. So long story short, there were 6 of us, and we ended up getting free park hopper tickets to the Epcot Center, which was its own story. So we just floated through. We had lunch in Italy, and then we decided to go use the bathroom in Japan, because those are really cool. Japan has really cool like bidets.
That's right. Yeah, all the buildings and
all
everything.
The things, right? So we go, and there were regular bathrooms in the Epcot Center. But while we were finishing up, my girlfriend grabbed my arm, and she said, "Can you hear them? Can you hear them?" Amber, we started running toward the sound, and there were 3 Japanese taiko drummers playing with all of their strength and all of their beauty. And the 6 of us just bawled. And it was this moment where the Lord said, your cancer journey, this is the end zone of your cancer journey. You are still here. It is time to pick up your sword and re-engage in battle. I'm not done with you yet. We still have more to do. And that was the marker point, Amber, for me to re-engage. And it was at that conference that I met the people that eventually led to all the things that are my current
Happening now. Wow.
Isn't God
my
amazing?
Gosh. Yes. And see, even you remembering that now, may that propel you forward with what you're doing with the podcast and the collective.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I needed that. My soul needed this conversation.
Well, I'm so grateful that it worked now and it didn't work the last time.
Yeah.
Or the time before that. I mean, seriously, we've sat and talked about like things aren't wasted. There's not mistakes.
Yeah.
So if there's a listener here who just wants to, connect with you and learn more about what you're doing, where can they find you?
I really enjoy Instagram. So I'm at Viv Mabuni. And if you want to follow Some Days Here, we're at Some Days Here Co. We actually have an event coming up at the end of June.
Yeah.
And
all right.
It's like wide open. If you want to learn about Asian American culture, just come as a learner, come to, just hear authentically the conversations. I think you can.
Are you all doing it live?
It's going to be a virtual event.
Oh, that's great though, because more people can come.
Yes. And we have some really special offerings for transracial adoptees, parents who have adopted children of Asian descent, mixed race relationships and identity, and just some really incredible things. But I think for your listeners who are not Asian, it's still, I would love for people to come and learn, because a lot of times there's just, like we were talking about in the beginning of our conversation, like there's all these stereotypes, there's not an understanding. But when we come with a heart that wants to learn and just kind of be an observer, like let the AAPI women do their thing and learn from that experience, I think it enriches all of us more. And so I would love to invite you and all of your listeners to come and participate with us on June 26th.
Okay. And so the registration for that, can it be found on your personal website, or is it on the podcast? Like, is all that stuff together?
So yes. So on Instagram, I have a link tree that has the registration, and you can use Viv10 and get 10% off your ticket. It's also at Some Days Here Co. The website
is where you can find all of it.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Vivian, thank you so much for this conversation. It's blessed my heart.
Well, I have loved connecting with you, and just the timing has been just a gift from the Lord to me. So thank you, Amber, for inviting me.
Who comes to mind when you think about investing in others? Maybe it's someone who has invested in you, or someone you have invested in. Or maybe it is someone you've watched pour their lives out with a willing heart. I want to encourage you to do two things. First, send that person a note or a text or an email, letting them know you appreciate them. Second, leave me a comment on Instagram at GraceEnoughPodcast_Amber with that person's name and how they've impacted you. Or send it to me in an email at GraceEnoughPodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to the Grace Enough Podcast. Tune in next time.